Greetings to our audience. Today we have the immense pleasure of interviewing Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, a former bureaucrat. He has also been the 17th Chief Election Commissioner of India, the first Muslim to achieve such a position. He has also authored a book on the role of our election commission in conducting the biggest elections of the biggest democracies in the world. His newest book, The Population Myth, debunks the ideas and narratives surrounding the Muslim population's growth rate and their tendencies towards birth rate control and family planning tendencies. Will Muslims ever take over the Hindu population in our country? Are they inherently averse towards family planning measures, or are all these assumptions constructed by the larger Hindu narrative, which is being constructed by the right-wing forces in India against the Muslim population? These are some of the topics and questions that we'll address in today's interview. So Shubham and I, Ria Jeff, are going to carry forward this interview for Probe, which is the monthly magazine of Caucus, the discussion forum of Hindu College. First of all, thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation. We are very delighted to have you with us, and we welcome you for this interview.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ria. I'm very happy that you boys and girls are doing so well. You're doing such a bright academic activities, and you're discussing very serious subjects. And this is the second time I'm interacting with this group, and I was very pleased with my first interaction, and I was happy when you invited me a second time. Now, today we are discussing my book, which is called The Population Myth: Islam, Family Planning, and Politics in India. And this book is a result of about 25 years of labor. Not that I had to just keep on working on it, but it was on my table, and off and on I'll work on it. And every time it was nearing completion, the new set of data will come in. And I'll have to have a look at the whole thing once again, whether the new data has changed my perspective. The data which I'm talking about is mainly National Family Health Survey, which is a massive data generated by Government of India every 5 years. Now, what are the myths that I'm talking about? There are mainly five myths which I'll be dealing with. One, that Muslims produce too many children and disproportionately higher than all other communities. Let me deal with this right away. That it is true that Muslim birth rate is the highest, but not the way it is projected by the right wing. Impression created is that for every family, suppose there are two children in a Hindu family, there will be 10 in a Muslim family, or if there are 3 in the Hindu family, there will be 11. So this is not how it is. It was, and even I came to believe it when I started researching on it, and I found that at no point in time the difference was more than one child. Now, does it not come to you as a surprise? Didn't you have the impression that every Muslim family will have 10 children, 15? Not more than one child. Secondly, out of the same thing, that of course the Muslim acceptance of family planning was the lowest, right? But who was the second lowest? Let's not forget that they were the Hindus. So if Muslims were making a mistake, or if they were being anti-national, as also mentioned in this narrative, then the second most unpatriotic were Hindus. Will that be the right thing to believe? Because they are the second best. Now, Muslim acceptance was just about 45%, Hindus was 54%, and all other, like 6 were about 80%. The Christians are very high, so that was the first myth.
Sure, sir.
Secondly,
I would have to interrupt you here because all this mention of myths and narratives surrounding the Muslim population brings me to your interview for the Indian Express, which you gave when your book was initially published. So there you confess that that even you 25 years ago you used to believe in these narratives, and you used to believe that Muslims have larger families and they are against contraceptives and family planning measures. So and the reason why I bring this up right now is because of the fact that there are still many people in this country who ardently believe that Muslims have larger families and they are somehow against family planning because of their religious notions. So, how is it that such narratives are created, such big narratives are created against a particular sector of the population? And how come you, despite being a Muslim yourself, believed in such a narrative 25 years ago? What were you seeing in the media around you and amongst the practices followed by your fellow Muslim neighbors and your family that led you to such an assumption?
Yeah. No, the fact that the other day we would read something about this or hear something about it, because it was a narrative which was being spread very deliberately as a matter of policy. And when you hear something, now obviously, what is the growth rate of Hindu population or Muslim population in your normal day-to-day life for a common man? It is improbable that you will know it. So you will know it only because it has been fed into your mind by repeated assertion. Now the second myth was that this Muslim rate of growth is disturbing the demographic proportions. Now this is to a certain extent is true in the sense that at the time of after partition in 1951, the first census after independence, the Hindu proportion of population was 84%, and whereas Muslims were 9.8%. Now, this has disturbed a little because from 84, Hindus have come down to 79.8. And this has got distributed among the Christians, the Jains, the Buddhists, and everybody else, and mainly the Muslims. And the Muslim population rate proportion has gone up from 9.8 to 14.2. But after that, actually, this proportion change has stopped because Muslims for the last 20 years or so, or 25, 30 years, have been adopting family planning faster than the Hindus, at a faster rate. I told you earlier that the gap was never more than one child. Now it has come down to less than half a child. It has come to 0.48. Less than 0.5, it has become 0.48. The gap is narrowing because Muslims are adopting family planning faster than the Hindus. Third myth which was there, which I also started believing, that there is an organized attempt by the Muslims to increase their population with the intention of capturing political power. Now that was wrong. That has turned out to be wrong because I asked, requested a friend of mine who was Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Professor Dinesh Singh, who was a great mathematician. I gave him my data and I said, Professor, just tell me in how many years Muslims will surpass the Hindu population. And he made a mathematical model for me, which is published here in the book. And he says, forget about it. It can never happen. Not in 60 years, not in 600 years, never. Because the base of Muslims is so much small and Hindus are so much larger. And to give you another fact which will come to you as a surprise, at the time of independence in 51 census, the number of Hindus was 30 crore more than that of the Muslims. Now, despite the higher birth rate of Muslims, now the gap is, which what used to be 30 crores is now 80 crores. And in the coming years, it will only increase. Yes. So, now finally, if I can finish the 4 or 5 myths which I am dealing with, that polygamy was responsible for it. Every Muslim used to have or had, that is the impression which is being created, 4 wives and 20 children or 40 children. You must have heard a very top leader of the country saying, "Hum panch, hamare 25."
Yes.
Meaning that I and my wife make 5 and then together we have 20 children. Or hum char, hamare 40. This is a slogan we have heard, you have heard from different quarters almost all the time. Now, this also is a total myth because 3-4 levels. This is a myth. Number one, the actual number of polygamists among the Muslims is the least. In fact, there was one survey of Government of India in 1975, according to which every community in India has some polygamy, including the Hindus. In fact, the tribals, which is never the Muslim, 15%, then Buddhists, Jains, the Christians, Hindus 5.8, Muslims 5.7. The least polygamous were the Muslims. Now, second myth is that Islam propagates
Sir,
or promotes family planning. Sorry, the polygamy. Yes, you want to say something, Ria?
yes, sir. Uh, as far as polygamy is concerned, we have like it is in our constitution that we have different personal laws for every religion. Muslim personal law allows them to enter into a polygamous relationship, whereas it is banned in Hinduism. So how come Hindus tend to be more polygamous than Muslims according to the data
Yeah.
cited by you?
Now, well, Hindus and all other communities were banned from polygamy in 1955, right? And this data which I'm talking about, which is the Government of India survey, is 1975, good 20 years after the act. Now, that, in fact,
So-
what you have raised a very important question, that despite the ban on the law, the polygamy among the Hindus is even higher than the Muslims. Now that's a matter of concern. Now, but the point which I'm trying to make here is that while polygamy is allowed, constitutionally allowed by Indian constitution, the Muslims are the least polygamous. Now, if I am not polygamous, why am I ready to die for it? If there is a demand for a ban on polygamy, I think Muslims should accept it, because if you are not actually practicing it, then why fight for it? Right?
True.
So now the Muslims also was that Islam permits. And every Maulana will tell you that this is a permission which is conditional. And what is the condition? That you can marry more than one, but provided you can treat them equally. I say that actually there is not one but two conditions, because you have to see the context. There is only one verse in the Quran which says you can marry 2, 3, or 4. Now, the context is that Allah is talking about the orphans and the widows. And he's saying that treat them fairly, treat them with justice, do not misappropriate their property, do not replace, substitute their good thing with your bad thing. And best way to do justice is to marry from among them 2, 3, or 4. Now, from among them, from among whom? The orphans, the widows. Now, the same clerics and Maulanas who say that there is one permission of equality, forget the other condition, which to my mind is a bigger condition. Okay, from among them, the verse says, from among the orphans, you can marry 2, 3, 4. Now, the equality concept is important here. That it doesn't mean that you bring in an orphan as a wife and put her in the kitchen as a domestic servant. And the wife is the queen and she is the domestic. Idea is then treat her equally. Both are equal wives. That is the concept. So this is one myth among the Muslims which also needs to be broken. And finally, before I take your other question, that even the Muslims suffer from a myth. They feel that Islam is against family planning. And non-Muslims definitely believe that, but even Muslims believe that, and even I believe that, frankly. And when I study the Quran and Hadith for myself, I found that Islam is not against family planning. In fact, Islam is the pioneer of the concept of family planning. We may not be following it, but Islam as a religion is a pioneer, because 1400 years ago, in the Quran, there is a verse of the young people, you should marry when you have the wherewithal to bring up a family. Now, one poor man went to the Prophet and he said that the Quran says that I should marry when I have. But well, I'm a poor man. I don't have the wherewithal, but I have sexual needs. What should I do? So Prophet then explained to me that you should marry, because marriage keeps you away from looking at other women with lust. And when you have the means, you should marry. And till you are in a position to support a family, resort to fasting, because fasting suppresses sexual desire. So there is an injection of the Quran, then there is an explanation of the Prophet. To me, together they are a proclamation of family planning. And I'll finish on this. There is another hadith. Hadith is whatever Prophet said or was reported to have done as seen by others. So somebody went to the Prophet and he said, I have many children and I'm tired of them. And I want to practice family planning by following a azl, which is coitus interruptus, which is withdrawal method. So, and he says, although I want to do that because I don't want any more children, but a Jew is saying that that is a minor infanticide. So, the Prophet said, no, the Jew is lying, which means it is not an infanticide. If you want to go ahead, go ahead. So, even the method is approved. Now, we have newer methods, we follow all of them. So together I have come to the conclusion that Islam was much ahead of its time 1400 years ago when there was no population pressure anywhere in the world. Islam talked of keeping the family small, the right upbringing, the right to education, the proper upbringing of the child. All these things were very progressive concepts.
Yes, sir. To that, sir, just now we have talked about you have talked about the Quran or Islam being the pioneer of family planning. So there is this particular verse in Quran, 17th verse of 31st chapter, which often is misinterpreted. Like people often misinterpret this particular this particular verse. Sorry, and the verse says, "Do not kill your children for fear of want. We will provide for them and for you. Surely killing them is a great sin." And this verse has been misinterpreted as it is not man who makes arrangement for food, but Allah who settled you in the land and has been providing for you and will provide for those who will come after you. So, sir, what is your interpretation on this particular myth? Because this is believed that this verse cuts down the very root of the movement of birth control. And so this is how it is misinterpreted.
Yes, let me explain to you that there is no, number one, Quran is the primary source of Islamic law or the Sharia. Now, nowhere in the Quran there is prohibition of family planning or birth control. All we have is interpretations. Now, interpretations of like the two verses you mentioned, I've mentioned them, these two verses plus many more to the same effect as you are mentioning, they're all mentioned here. That there are only interpretations for or against family planning. And now this was actually against the female infanticide. You know, the Arabs of the pre-Islamic Arab, of Jahiliya age or age of ignorance, they used to bury their girls alive. They used to kill their girls. I mean, something which is happening unfortunately even today in the form of infanticide and feticide. Now, that verse came in that context. Do not kill your daughter. And because the excuse they used to give, look, I have so many children, I'm very poor, so why not kill the boys? They used to kill not their sons, but the daughters. This ayat came in that context. Do not kill them in the name of your poverty and affordability, because if they are born, we will provide for them. God says we will take care of them. This was the context. So as I said, basically these are only the interpretations which have been made, positive and negative. And now you mentioned very right thing, but what about the verse which says only when you have the wherewithal you should marry? So what about that? This is very, very specific. It's talking about marriage, whereas you're talking about the killing of the children, particularly daughters. So the verse which is specific to marriage, that don't marry till you can bring up a family, till you can afford it, till you have the means to bring them, look after the family.
Okay, sir. Sir, you have also been talking about it, and right now also you have pointed a little bit of it. For Muslims, polygamy draws its validity from chapter 4 of the Quran. Its verses allow men to marry 2 or 3 or 4 women, and hence polygamy. So, does this lead to a population explosion in Muslim community, sir? And how would you break this particular myth surrounding this particular thing? And this being the reason behind population explosion?
Yeah. Yes,
Sir,
actually, I've already mentioned it, and the more than 3 points in this context. One, this verse is there is only one verse in the Quran which talks of multiple marriages, the one you are referring to. And it
Yes.
says that you can, and as I mentioned, that this verse is about the treatment of the orphans and widows. There used to be lots of orphans and widows in those days of tribal warfare. There used to be too many wars, the men will get killed in the war, and you will be left with widows and children. It is in that context that God is saying that treat them fairly, treat them with justice, do not misappropriate their property, and best is from among them. Marry 2, 3, or 4 from among the orphans. Very specifically, it says. It's not that when the permission is allowed and I go out looking for my second wife or a third wife. No, marry a widow, and preferably widow with children, because she is the one who needs the economic security. So this is the context which even our Islamic clerics tend to forget. They talk of one condition of treat them equally, treat them equally. They talk of that for sure. But what about to marry whom? Marry from among the widows.
okay, sir. So now that we have covered a very major part of the debate, which is polygamy, this somehow brings me to the question of women in Islam. It is true that what Quran says is very progressive for the time that Quran was written in, but it is also true that the condition of women will have a very big impact on the total fertility rate of any community or religion. And this is something that you've also repeatedly mentioned in your book. The condition of women, like their age at marriage, the age at which they get pregnant, their literacy rate, all of this immensely have an impact on the total fertility rate. So, going beyond what the religious text Quran says, and if we look at the data, we'll find that the Muslim women, especially when compared to women from other religions, they do not fare well at developmental indicators. Muslim women are at the bottom in workforce participation. They are the least literate when compared with women from other religion, and they get pregnant at an early age. They have the lowest net attendance ratio when it comes to attending higher and secondary schooling. So, if we look at it, Muslim women are at the bottom of every developmental indicator, regardless of what Quran says about them. So, according to you, what explains this phenomenon? Why Muslim women are so backward? Is it because of religious values in Islam, or has it got something else to do with?
So I think you put it very beautifully and very knowledgeably. You have obviously you've read the book, that is for
Yes,
sure.
sir. Yes, sir.
All the
Both
facts
of
together
us
you
have.
mentioned. Yes. So now the important thing here is something which I should have mentioned earlier, because we discussed religion as a factor and discounted religion as a factor. If that is the case, what are the real factors which influence family planning behavior? Now, there are three factors mainly. One is literacy, particularly of girls. Second is income. Third is service delivery. And of course, these three lead to age of marriage getting delayed. And if there is literacy, there will be more income. So there is an interplay of factors. Now, unfortunately and sadly, it is true, despite Islam's emphasis on education, Muslims are the least educated, and their girls particularly so, which is a very unfortunate situation, and it is for Muslims to introspect and think about why is it. The very first word of the Quran, which was revealed on the Prophet, Iqra. Iqra means read or recite, O Prophet, in the name of Allah. Now, reading, reciting, education is the implication, and there is a hadith of the Prophet that education for both boys and girls is compulsory. Now, both boys and girls, and acquire education even if you have to go to China. So, even if you have to go to China, now why will anybody go to China to acquire education? What education? So, not Quranic education for sure. So, the fact that Islam emphasizes education, but Muslims are the least educated, is a matter of concern which the Muslim community should be worried about. and I have highlighted that fact that we have to focus on the education of girls, because as the number of as the literacy grows, the number of children goes down, and
Yes,
as
sir.
the income grows, the number of children goes down. And with service delivery, so obviously you focus on these three, and all three are secular concepts. There is no religion here, as you rightly pointed out. So we have to focus. Otherwise, we are barking up a wrong tree. If we have not diagnosed the cause of backwardness, how will we treat it? Therefore, having diagnosed the cause of backwardness, we have to deal with this backwardness and work on these issues.
But sir, like you've stated in the response that Quran, Quran emphasizes on reading and knowledge and learning, but still somehow the message has not reached to the masses. So and we can see it in terms of literacy level for both men and women. So how come, despite having nice religious teachings in Quran, Muslims couldn't keep up with other religions? Like, what could be the possible reason, or is it, does it still remain undiagnosed? Like, we have to research further.
So, though it is undiagnosed in the sense that Muslims should themselves have inquired into this. Why is it, why when the religion imposes the duty of education on you and your girls, so why are you not giving it to them? Why there is a gap between Islamic teaching and Islamic practice? That need to be studied. But of course, there is again interplay of factors, because one reason for Muslim backwardness in literacy and education is their poverty, because they cannot afford to send their children to school. In fact, far from sending to school, they need even a 6-year, 8-year-old children to start working. They're helping their parents in work, in earning activities. So they were drawn from school and sent to work. So we need to, all these factors have to be seen together, and education must get top priority, and which is what one of my main recommendations in the book is.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir, rightly pointed out. But like, we acknowledge that there has been an interplay of various factors like poverty, and which eventually prohibit Muslims from attaining the perfect level of education that they should. But don't you think there is religion as a factor as well? Because there are madrasas everywhere, and Muslim children are enrolled into those madrasas, rather than rather than their parents having them enrolled at government schools or like different schools. So how, like, should we start a discussion in the Muslim community to soften the clutches of religion from the children, and move them forward towards modern education of sciences and English, move them away from madrasas if they're not helping, as we're seeing right now?
Yeah. Now, there are two things I would like to mention. That number one, madrasa is an Arabic word for a pathshala. Just the same place where which you may call a school in English, pathshala in Hindi is madrasa in Arabic and Urdu. See, it's just an Arabic word. So madrasa is much misunderstood. Madrasa is where the dars is given, or the root of this word is darasa. Dars means lesson, where the teaching is done. Now, madrasas were working when there were no primary schools. Madrasas were the first to come up, because in every village there will be a mosque, and that mosque will also start enrolling students and will start giving them this education. It is not a competitor for the government school, the normal school. Now, you may be going to a normal school, but at the same time, if you want to study the Quran, learn the Quran, every child is supposed to learn the Quran, to read the Quran, learn to read it once. Where will he read it? Is it taught in a government school, private school, any school? No. So that is when the need for a madrasa comes. Otherwise, my own children, we hired a Maulvi to come home and teach them the Quran. My daughter lives in London. She hired a Maulvi in London to come home and teach the children. Now, those who cannot afford to hire a private tutor, they send their children to the madrasa. And madrasa is nothing but where the teaching of the Quran and also normal teaching, the primary school teaching, the language. I learned my Urdu the first 6 months, 1 year in a madrasa which was owned by my father, my grandfather, in fact. So we learned there, and as soon as we grew up, we went to a normal school. So this madrasa is grossly misunderstood. Now, the second point you have raised is why is it religion is factored in the mind of the Muslim scholar. I did a primary survey also in this book, for this book, in Hyderabad, in Lucknow, and in Alwar district, which is in Rajasthan, but contiguous area to the Mewat of Gurgaon and Faridabad. And I found 75% people said that Islam is against family. Why, we asked them, why is it that you have too many children? They said, because our religion prohibits family planning. That is the ignorance which has penetrated the mind of these people.
Yes.
So we asked them, who told you that? They said, the local Maulana, local Imam.
Yes, sir.
So we went to the local Imam. We said, why are you promoting? Why are you against family planning? He says, because religion is against it. Against it. I said, tell us where Islam is prohibiting. So they had no idea. They generally vague feeling, oh, Islam is against it, without actually any knowledge. I have tried to, through this book, to create a resource material that this should be taught to our Maulana from the Quran, from the Hadith. That this is what it says about girls' education. Also, for instance, you said that Islam treats girls and boys equally. I have given in my book several verses from the Quran which talk of equality. They talk of men and women in the same breath. And in the Islam, Quran says women have the same rights as men, the same functions as men. So, repeatedly the equality is asserted by the Quran and by the Hadith, which could be the reason why female infanticide, the feticide among the Muslims is less. The one positive figure about the Muslims is that the gender ratio among the Muslims is better than other communities, particularly the Hindus. Now, the Hindus' gender ratio is 939 girls for 1,000 men. For the Muslims, it is 951. Because feticide is less, because maybe some people have read and heard about this concept of equality of girls and practice it. So, in fact, there is a hadith that blessed is the man whose first child is a girl. There is another hadith, there are two girls. In fact, there is one which says if there are three daughters, that person will enter paradise shoulder to shoulder with me. So, these are the kind of hadith and verses which may be keeping Muslims from female feticide.
Yes, sir.
So, sir, I mean, having heard from you so much about the positive aspects of Islam and what it has got to say about family planning and women in particular, however, most of the Indian population, especially the Hindus, they see Islam as it is being presented by the Maulanas that you talked about when you went to Alwar, which who were the orthodoxies amongst the Islam population and who were against progressive educational and family planning measures. So is there somewhere, like, we have also seen this similar thing happening in Hinduism and even in Christianity back in the days, like during the time of Reformation, when the Catholic Church had control over the entire Christianity, and they were interpreting the texts for their own personal benefit and for the corruption. And it was Martin Luther who opposed it, and who gave the Bible in the hands of the Christian people and asked them to interpret it themselves. And same for Hinduism. We were in the clutches of the Brahmins and Pandits who for so long they have exploited the Dalit population for such a very long period of time. So, do you think a similar thing is happening in Islam, where all these Maulvis and Maulanas, they are the orthodoxies in the Islamic population, and they are misinterpreting the Quran for the masses, and somehow that is not working well for the population? So, do you think something needs to be done about that? Maybe a discussion should start.
Yeah, yes, very good point, very good suggestion. That the quality of these Maulanas should be evaluated by some Muslim clerical body itself. Whether they are suitably educated in the Quran and the Hadith, or they are misinformed and they are ignorant. So that needs to be audited, and there should be the constant check on their knowledge. Otherwise, they will be spreading disinformation. For instance, this disinformation among the Muslims that they should not take COVID vaccination. Now, this is quite widespread. They had opposed even polio vaccination because of lack of trust in society and in the government. The polio drops were totally attacked because they say that when you give it to Muslim children, they will become sterilized and they will not be. It is a measure to control their population. Now there is a movement, organized or spontaneous, against these vaccines, which I think is very, very uneducated and very silly. And Muslim leadership should come forward and dispel these myths, and they are coming forward. Many of them have appealed to the Muslim population to follow the Government of India guidelines and make themselves safe.
Yes, sir. Sir, Ria, may I?
I have just one question. So,
Uh-huh.
if you have anything other than like, you go ahead first. I'll ask later.
Okay. Sir, returning back to the propaganda and the misinformation population by the Muslim community after a few years are like in circulation. So how would you address people with such mentality? And most importantly, we as students and responsible citizens of India, how should we react to this particular thing?
Yeah, I heard Prime Minister mentioning this in his Independence Day speech from the Red Fort, and he linked it with patriotism, in a different language, but which to my mind, which is very, very wrong thing to say. Although now, if we use that the analogy in our context, Muslims, since they produce the largest number of children, they are the most unpatriotic. But then don't forget who is the second most producer of children? The Hindus. Are you saying that Hindus are the second most unpatriotic? No, it is totally absurd. The acceptance of family planning among Muslims, as I mentioned, is 45%. Hindus are 54%. And who is the most patriotic? The Sikhs, because they have 80% acceptance of family planning. And the same guys who link it with patriotism are willing to call every Sikh a Khalistani at the drop of a hat. Now, linking it up with patriotism is absolutely absurd, to say the least.
So, sir, according to you, that is just a political stunt.
Absolutely. It's absolutely political and totally ignorant and ill-informed. And I would also like to clarify one thing, both of you. There is no Hindu rate or Muslim rate of growth of population. Because if that was the case, already, there are 24 states in the country where Muslim family planning is better than of the Hindus in Bihar. Now, if religion was a factor, then all across the country, the Muslim birth rate will be the highest. But Bihar is 4.11, and in Tamil Nadu it is 1.74, and in 24 states, Muslim practice of family planning is better than the Hindus of Bihar. Now, what do you call it? Will you call it a Hindu population rate or a Muslim population? No. The rate is the vast. As Bihar for the Muslims, for the Hindus similarly. In Sikkim it is 1.11, and in Bihar it is 3.5 or something.
Yes. Yeah, please.
All right. So now that we have, now that Sir has debunked most of the myths and narratives, and like we now understand the real socio-economic factors behind the condition of Muslim population, and we realize that religion is not really the reason why Muslims have high birth rate, and Muslims, are somehow seem to be against contraceptives and family planning measures. But even if we look at it, we understand that the major reason why narratives and myths are constructed around the Muslim population is because of the existence of separate personal laws in India. Muslims have their personal law, Hindus have their separate personal law, and this distinction somehow creates a sense of insecurity amongst people of various religions, right? So, sir, do you see the implementation of uniform civil code as an end to the creation of to the possibility of creation of such myths and narratives around the Muslim populations? Because if we have same law for everyone, then people will not even have the scope to create, baseless assumptions and baseless narratives about the Muslim population. What do you think about the scope of uniform civil code?
A very, very good question. Very good question. The demand for Muslim persons for a common civil code, why does it come? If you ask anybody who is demanding it, I ask you and I ask your friend, why do we need common civil code? The answer would be because for everybody else there is a limitation of one wife. For Muslim there is no limitation. They would not be having a second point to mention. There are several reasons. Property rights. Now, Islam had given property right. Islam gave property right 1400 years ago, and Hindus gave property right only 40, 50 years ago. So what about that? So therefore, common civil code they will have to go into larger issues. Personally, I am in favor of common civil code. But the fact that the demand is coming out of total insincerity, of coming based on ignorant narrative, on the presumption that every Muslim has 4 wives, and if factually it is not correct, there is no need. When there is no polygamy, why do we need to ban polygamy? Because there is hardly any polygamy in the country. So it is based on mistrust. So which is why Muslims would likely to oppose it, because they will think that somehow Hindutva is indirectly is being imposed on them. And otherwise, if you create knowledge and education, which was the question by my friend here, what should the Shubham had talked about, what should be the role of students. Now, best is spread knowledge, spread information as against disinformation. Spread the truth and let people come to their own conclusion. And, in fact, I would like debate if you think I'm making some sense. Maybe you write articles on the subject. Maybe you start a debate in your college on this, in your caucus and in your society, and that is how the knowledge will spread. Spread of correct knowledge among the Muslims, among non-Muslims, among everybody. Let us know the fact, let us know the truth, and then come to our own conclusion. That is what is required. And in fact, my conclusion out of the book is actually Hindus and Muslims are not on the opposite ends of the spectrum. They are on the same end of the spectrum, because they are both backward. Muslims are the most backward, Hindus are the second most backward, which is why their birth rate is second highest. So we have to address all of them together. And family planning program has become actually a success story in India. 26 out of 29 states have already come below the replacement level of 2.1. Now, 2.1 means that if 2 parents die, there are 2 children to take over, right? So already 26 states have reached the replacement level. Only 3 states we have to focus on: Bihar, UP, and Madhya Pradesh, and to a certain extent Rajasthan. These are the so-called Bimari states. We have to focus on them, and as it is, the Muslims are adopting family planning much faster than the Hindus, and if that trend continues, there is no fear of any threat to the Muslims from the to the Hindu community from the Muslim rate of growth.
Sure, sir. We will surely be debating on this vital topic. And sir, now having debunked the myth surrounding the Muslim community, we would be enlightened to know the way forward, sir. As you have clearly mentioned in your book that family planning is a success in countries like Malaysia, Bangladesh, Iran, etc. But when it comes to India, it cannot be considered a success amongst Muslim communities, sir.
Yeah.
So, what can be the probable reason for that, and what solutions would you like to put forth, sir?
There are two things in my book. One, there is a chapter on family planning among prominent Muslim countries. We find the family planning acceptance in Iran is much higher than in India, and they're very conservative Muslim. Even Bangladesh has overtaken India. That is something we should worry about. Why is it that we are lagging behind? Bangladesh is an overwhelming majority Muslim, but they have accepted family planning in a big way. Then there is a chapter which also looks at other religion, all religion. What is the attitude of different religions towards family planning? How to dispel? Every religion has some inference, and in fact, for instance, there is a total opposition to family planning concept among the Christians. So, but why is it that only Islam and Muslims are scrutinized? That is because of the environment which has been created. So now you ask me what are the recommendations?
Yes, sir, the way forward.
Yes, looking forward, we should spread a message of proactive family planning among the Muslims. That they should not believe their Maulana if they are opposing it in the name of religion. They should adopt family planning in a big way because that is where the future is. They should educate their children. Then there should be proper training of staff. Suppose as a family planning worker, you come to me, why you have 4 children, 5 children, and why don't you adopt family planning? And I tell you Islam is against it. So are you equipped to answer me? No, because you have not been trained. You should be equipped. And maybe there should be some document in your hand, a booklet which you should give for me to read. And the faith leaders, our faith leaders should let us have a discussion and seminar with them, and let us send them to Iran, to Indonesia, to Bangladesh, where family planning is a success story. If they go and see, now their masjid, the mosque have been used as center of family planning learning. In Friday prayer khutbah, family planning is being talked about. So whenever Maulanas will receive in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Iran, and Bangladesh, probably they will also take an inspiration. And we should send our journalists, our media to these countries, and conversely invite the ulama and journalists of those countries to come and talk to our people, so that with that interaction we will learn a lot from what is happening in the Islamic world, because there is no compulsion for Iran to make family planning a state policy, but they are doing it because they know it is not against Islam. So that is a myth. So they don't have, and they are following it.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sure, sir. With this, we'll have to conclude. And like, I would like to end it on this note that it is very ironic that the battle is like the way this whole situation is being presented looks like a battle between Hindu and Muslims. Whereas, as you clearly mentioned with your research, that Hindus and Muslims actually tend to be not at the opposite end of the spectrum, but they are in fact all together. Hindus just being a few digits ahead than Muslims at certain targets and at certain measures. So it is time that we start looking at the truth rather than believing myths and narratives surrounding any population, be it Hindus or Muslims. So that brings us to the end of this wonderful interview. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. We indeed have a very, we indeed had a very good discussion with you, and we hope that you had a great time as well. For the information of our readers, I would like to inform that this interview will also be published in the 5th edition of Probe, the monthly magazine of Caucus, for the month of May. So thank you so much, sir. We really had a very great time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice day. With this, I'll end the interview here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank